Welcome to You Belong in the C-Suite podcast. You are ambitious in life and in your career, but something is missing. You want to bring more of your passion to what you do. Because let's be honest, you pour a ton into your work, and it needs to mean more. I'm your host, Laura and Jim. I'm a mom, wife, PhD, coach, advocate, introvert, and indoor rowing fanatic. I'm passionate about living a life that's in line with my values. We'll give you the actionable tips and tools you need to lead with your values, make a difference, and have career success. The world needs more diversity and authenticity in the top jobs at organizations. Your leadership belongs there. You belong in the C-Suite. What gets you up in the morning? What drives your decisions? What do you stand for? No idea, not even sure where to start? I use my values to guide my life and career. It's the basis of how I've built boundaries for myself and stuck to them. Are you ready to dig into what matters to you? Go to thecatchgroup.com to download your free values worksheet. That's thecatchgroup.com to download your free values worksheet to get to your core values and take action on what matters most. Welcome to this week's episode of the You Belong in the C-Suite podcast. Today we are celebrating the second birthday of the release of my first book, Values First: How Knowing Your Core Beliefs Can Get You the Life and Career You Want. I cannot believe it has already been 2 years since the book's release. And as I reflect on this 2-year milestone, I'm thinking about all of the impacts that this book has had. I've been able to speak to thousands of leaders in multiple organizations on topics from the book, like building boundaries, identifying core values, and leading with your values. I've worked with multiple one-on-one clients with the tools from this book to reach career clarity on their next right career move. I've worked with leadership teams with the Values First framework to build high-performing teams. I've worked with organizations to identify their organizational goals and then integrate them into systems within their companies. And now we even certify leaders in the Values First Leaders Workshop, which I'm super excited about because we can impact leaders and their teams. And spoiler alert, I've started on my second book, Values First Teams, which takes the framework to the next level, to the team level, to build out team culture and team values to get the results that you want. So there is so much to celebrate and also so much more to come. And to honor this milestone today, I'm excited to share with you one of the most popular topics from the book, how to build values-based boundaries. And not only how to build them, but how to keep them. In this episode, you're going to hear me talk about the 3 steps to building a boundary and what to do if your manager or company says no to the boundary that you really need. Also, what to do when your boundaries are broken by others. You'll also hear about the importance of physical boundaries and how to be relentless in keeping them. So if you haven't already yet, download the Values First workbook to go along with all of these exercises at thecatchgroup.com/valuesfirst. And don't forget to get your copy of the Values First audiobook that's now available on Itunes and Audible. So help me celebrate the 2-year publication date by letting me know how the book has impacted your life and career by sending me a note on LinkedIn or emailing us at hello@thecatchgroup.com. So now you are going to hear an excerpt from the book on building boundaries. So let's get started. 3 steps to boundary setting. Values of family, friendship, self-care, or health show up for almost every coaching client I've worked with. Unsurprisingly, these values are often accompanied by feelings of unhappiness or anxiety. They are areas of life that are important, but aren't getting prioritized within the schedules of busy executives, parents, and caregivers. What is holding you back from holding space for yourself? When I ask the women that I coach, the answer that I get most often is work priorities. That makes sense, as we spend most of our waking time at work, right? Many Americans work many more hours than the old school 9 to 5. Did people ever really work 9 to 5? Was that ever really a thing? Many work 50 plus hours a week and some much more. That doesn't include commute time checking in on email when you're at home, and other small fires you put out. I'm not going to tell you that I have work-life balance. I don't think that's a thing. I was at a women's conference where speaker Crystal Washington said, "The only people who have work-life balance are work-life balance consultants." It got a laugh from the room filled with over 500 women. I've found that when I live my life based on my values and create strong, value-driven boundaries, I have a values-driven life. How do I prioritize those boundaries and structure my days? You guessed it, through my values. You need to go back to that foundation, your values, to ensure that you actually hold space for your own boundaries. Preserve time and preserve your priorities by holding space for yourself. The epitome of self-value and worth is holding space for your own boundaries. Early in my career, I put in a ton of hours. I, like many new graduates, wanted to prove myself. One of my values is achievement, so I like to drive for results and show impact and get things done. In my early career, I prioritized my value of achievement over others, which meant working too many hours. And that was appropriate in that season of my life for my goals and values. As my family grew, my value of quality time with them became more and more important to me. In my early mid-career, I was working in a big corporate office in which FaceTime was particularly emphasized. I had an hour-long commute each day from the house to the office. Living further away from my office was our choice since it was closer to my husband's job. But that meant I would get home after 6 p.m. and have a limited amount of time to spend with the baby before we put him to bed. On days when I could, I started leaving the office early to avoid traffic. Early meant 4:30 p.m., and I would always feel like I had to stealthily leave, making sure to avoid the side of the hallway that had all the executive offices on it. I didn't want senior leaders seeing me leave the office at 4:30 p.m. because I was afraid that they would think I was skipping out or that I wasn't committed to my work. So I would walk quickly on the other side of the hall, avoid eye contact or any lingering conversations with colleagues as I briskly left. After exiting the building, it was still a bit of a walk to get to my car in the parking lot. Unavoidably, I'd run into people that were coming into the building as I was leaving for the day. I'd often get passive-aggressive comments like, "Leaving so soon?" or "Already done for the day?" But on these days, I would get home in record time. It was glorious. I got to spend more quality time at home with my family, which is what I valued more than anything. I would catch up on email in the evenings. This is an example of the split shift, working after the kids go to bed. Many working parents, especially mothers, do this. It helped me so much that I took action to make it my daily reality. Here's how. 1. Talk to my manager. I decided to have a conversation with him to see if this was a schedule I could have more frequently. When I say more frequently, I mean that's the new schedule I wanted every day, to be able to leave between 4 and 4:30 p.m. We talked about it, and he was very supportive. Hooray! 2. I followed through consistently. The next thing I needed to do was actually follow my new schedule. It feels like it would be easy to do, but wanting and doing are sometimes very different things. There were days that I needed to get that last thing done. You know, that last thing on your list that you think will take 5 minutes, but when you look at the time, at least 20 minutes has vanished? I had to not do that last thing sometimes, not have that hallway chat with a friend I wanted to catch up with, or not spend another 15 minutes responding to emails. Because it was tied to my value of family, it was easier for me to make those decisions day in and day out. Not only did I have a new schedule, but I benefited from it more than I ever thought I would. I had more quality time with my family. I spent less time in traffic, which my body thanked me for. And over time, I was able to release the guilt I previously held from sneaking out. Now I know that to be successful, I need to set lots of boundaries. I'm most successful in sticking to boundaries when I tie them to something I deeply care about. I root my boundaries in my values. Rooting them in your values helps you identify the most important boundaries you should be keeping and the motivation to stick to them. And the next time someone said, "Leaving the office already?" as I was walking out to my car and they were walking back into the office, I would reply back, "Yes, and you're heading in the wrong direction." Are you headed in the right direction? Here's how to check. The Values First framework lays out 3 steps to setting a boundary. Use the accompanying worksheet called Boundary Builder from the Values First workbook. Download from thecatchgroup.com. The 3 steps you need to set and keep a boundary are: 1. Tie it to a value. 2. Set up a system. 3. Celebrate consistency. Time to get started. Grab your workbook and a pen. Be honest as you go through the questions. First, prioritize a value that needs a boundary. Not a nice-to-have boundary, but a must-have. To figure out which value to prioritize, refer back to your answers from the I'm Living My Values When worksheet. Prioritize a value that will make the biggest impact on your life and start there. Once you have picked one core value, reflect on the following questions. What does it look like to successfully live this core value? What's the cost of not doing it? What's one thing you can do to make it happen? By prioritizing a core value and understanding one thing you can do to make it happen, you've just clarified the boundary you need to create. You have identified something that you are probably not doing now to live that core value. A behavior that needs to change. Now you can work towards that desired behavior. Second, set up a system to support that desired behavior or mindset shift. To identify what needs to happen for you to live that successfully, reflect on the following questions. What needs to happen in order for your boundary to work? What support do you need? What are the internal and external objections? How will you deal with boundary objections? For your boundary to work for you, you may need to have a conversation with your manager, block your calendar, or go to bed at a certain time. You may need more support from others or to outsource a task to free up more time. Objections are either internal or external. First, consider the internal objections, the stories that you tell yourself that stop you from setting the boundary in the first place. These are the fears you hold that may not hold any truth, but keep you from exercising the boundary. My internal objections were, everyone will think I'm less committed to my job because I'm leaving early, and I have to be in the office until 5 p.m., otherwise I'm not working. These internal objections were things I was telling myself, but were they true? No, they were false. I don't know what other people were thinking about me. And I was working, just in a different way. Next, consider the external objections. Had anyone told me that I couldn't have the schedule? Nope, the opposite. My manager was very supportive of it. What about those passive-aggressive objections from others as I was leaving the building? I had to make the decision to reject those. Those passive-aggressive people didn't get to set or divert me from my boundaries. What will your strategy be to deal with boundary objections that you receive? Know the objections and have an answer or a plan. This isn't about creating a hard line and not being flexible. It is about planning for it when you can and holding to it as much as possible. There will be times when you can't. Give yourself grace and try and be consistent. The third step in the 3-step process is to celebrate consistency. How will you celebrate living your values and consistently holding your boundaries? I reward myself with listening to a new book or podcast. Yes, I'm a nerd. Or fun music I could listen to in the car. Write a list of things you will do to celebrate. Then do one of the things on your list to reward yourself for keeping your boundary. Positive reinforcement. It isn't about beating yourself up for not holding your boundary. It's about celebrating when you do it again and again. When your manager or company says no, what if you figure out the boundary that you want, go to your manager to tell them, but the conversation doesn't go well? What if they say no? A leader named Amanda tried to set a boundary and encountered pushback. Amanda was a manager at a small company. She had a long morning commute, more than an hour and 15 minutes one way. After spending her morning in the car, she would get to work feeling frustrated and low on energy. She knew something had to give. Amanda knew that if she checked in on email at home in the morning, she could leave later and miss traffic to get to work a little later in the day. She went to her manager to request her schedule change. While her manager understood and empathized with her situation, she was not agreeable to Amanda's plan. She told her no. Their team sat next to the CFO, and the optics of showing up that late in the morning wouldn't look good for the team. So she declined Amanda's request. Amanda felt defeated and left the meeting feeling more frustrated. Amanda thought through her options. In their next one-on-one meeting, Amanda asked her manager if she could come in earlier in the day to arrive at 7, still missing traffic. Her manager agreed to her new solution because she would be seen in the office and get that all-important FaceTime in first thing in the morning. If you experience a similar situation, how might you be able to move forward? Reflect on the next set of questions to see how you can negotiate for what you value. Was there a business reason for the rejection? Can a compromise be made? Is there a different system that you can set up? Go back to the value that boundary is tied to. What other ways can you get that value met? If your manager consistently turns down your requests or doesn't respect your boundaries, then you may need to evaluate your situation. Is this a non-negotiable for you? Do you work for a company that doesn't align with your values? Is it time to look for a different opportunity that does align with your values? Reflecting on these questions and taking action will get you one step closer to building boundaries and living a life guided by your values. Who are boundaries for? Boundaries are for everyone. Boundaries aren't only for people who already have their careers established. They aren't just for executives. They are for all levels of your career or life stage. The earlier you start, the easier it will be to establish a routine and expectation of boundaries in your life. You can create boundaries if you work in an achievement-driven or competitive company culture, are single or have a family, have a supportive boss or a jerk for a boss, support a leader in a big leadership position, don't have a team, are out of the workforce, are a student, are a leader of a team, work in a top leadership position. Many women that I coach are in executive roles or have high job aspirations and think that they must make big trade-offs for those top leadership positions. While most of us may have to make some trade-offs, sometimes it feels like they have to give away their souls for a big job. It isn't work-life balance. It is setting priorities based on your values. You can have a big job, a big impact, and big boundaries. But you have to build the boundaries. You have to set the priorities. You have to do it consistently. Non-negotiables. Some boundaries at work are non-negotiables. I had a mentor that told me about being yelled at in a meeting earlier in her career. At the time, she sat through it and didn't say anything. Now, she has a hard line of not tolerating that behavior. If someone yells at her in a meeting, she ends the meeting and leaves the situation. For me, my safety is non-negotiable. I would often travel for work and get home very late at night. On many occasions, I was by myself in airport parking garages after midnight. The company that I worked for had a maximum you could spend on parking when traveling. I didn't feel safe parking in a general parking lot at the airport when I would have a late return. The company allowed me to expense a taxi ride or use an airport parking valet, both of which were above the allotted parking maximum when traveling to ensure I felt safe. What are your non-negotiables? When boundaries are broken by others. Even when you have put boundaries in place and have held them consistently, others may not abide by them. In my mid-career, I was working for a team with multiple clients. Within our work group, we valued high-quality work standards, partnership, and collaboration. We set up systems to ensure that we partnered with clients to deliver high-quality work. We had a client that would often ask for things on his time frame, which of course was always immediately. I gave him feedback about how long tasks took, but the very next time, he asked for a favor and an exception. That would mean longer hours for me or my team to accommodate his request, in addition to pushing out other work to get his done first. I told him we were unable to accommodate his request by his deadline, but could get it done by the agreed upon time, which was 3 business days later. He didn't like my answer and went to my direct report. My direct report alerted me to the request. I asked her to forward the request to me, and I reiterated to him the answer. No. He went to his manager, who went to my manager. I had anticipated him going around me and had already alerted my manager and prepared him with the email trail. My manager reiterated the timeline to his peer and shut down the expedited request. People will try to work around your boundary. They may go around you or above you. Could I have worked longer hours that day to fulfill that request? If we did that for him, then we would have to do that for everyone, and that wasn't possible. That wouldn't have been following our system or have been in line with our values. What will you do when, not if, but when, someone breaches your boundary? Here are a few tactics you can use. Plan for someone overstepping or breaching your boundary. What will you tell the person that overstepped? Practice the conversation with a trusted friend. Have an email script ready to go so that you can copy and paste it in an email without overthinking it in the moment. Over-communicate your boundary. Get air cover from your manager and keep them informed. Stay consistent through the discomfort of pushing back. By preparing for boundary breakdowns, you are setting yourself up to successfully live your values. Physical boundaries. The physical environment around you can impact your boundaries. A Wall Street Journal article from 2020 describes that with no commute, Americans worked more during the pandemic. Many employees traded their seats on trains or cars for longer hours in their uncomfortable seats at their makeshift work-from-home desks. What was supposed to be temporary ended up being a much more permanent work-from-home situation. Whether you were a seasoned work-from-home employee or it became your new way of life during the pandemic, boundaries have become more important. How can you create boundaries around work when it is in such close proximity to home life? How do you shut it off when it is right there? One thing that helped me keep to my boundaries is the way I set up the physical space around me. When creating my workspace at home, it was important that it was clearly delineated and that there was a physical reminder to shut down when work was done. When I went to work, upstairs, it signaled to the kids that it was time for me to work and be present there. They would give me a hug and tell me to have great meetings. It was similar to the goodbyes that they previously gave me before I left for the office, except now I got to wear stretchy pants and walk up 18 stairs instead of driving the 45 minutes to the office. I used to work with a vice president in human resources who, when she worked from home, got dressed as if she were going to the office, the signal to her children that she was working. Whether in an office location or working from home, make the space your own. I use this as a way to bring reminders of my values into spaces where I spend my time while working. In my home office, I have my favorite quotes framed and favorite family pictures hanging on the wall. While I'm on Zoom, the pictures are in the background and often spark conversation, which gives me an opportunity to share some fun memories tied to my values. Consider the physical space when working from home and boundaries you may need to set. Do you have a delineated workspace? How will you signal the beginning and end of your workday? How can your values be represented in your working space to remind you of your boundaries? If you find that you're not setting a physical boundary for yourself, go back to the 3-step boundary setting process above in your workbook and take action. You've learned a simple 3-step method to set boundaries. If your boundaries are tied to your values, you're more likely to keep them. It puts a reason behind it, an accountability to prioritize what matters most to you. Give yourself permission to prioritize you. At 8.5 months pregnant with my second child, I got a promotion. New job, new boss, transitioning my old role, all while getting ready to have a baby and preparing our first son to be a big brother. It was a lot of change at once. It was great because it was a clean break from my old job to my new job. I transitioned everything before I went on maternity leave and got into my new job for several weeks before baby boy number 2 arrived. I took a 3.5-month maternity leave and came back to work ready to prove myself to this new team and to begin to build and lead projects. I felt guilty about getting into a job and then immediately leaving for 3.5 months. I did not want to let them down, so I tried to overcompensate when I got back. When I took the job, my new boss assured me, "We'll be fine. People have babies all the time. Don't worry about it." It was one of the best things I could have heard at the time and in my career, to have my pregnancy supported by another woman that I admired. She made me realize that having a baby and having a big career was possible and that there was no need to apologize for it. But I would be lying if I told you I didn't feel guilt. Guilt for taking a job and then being absent to a new team, and guilt for wanting the promotion when it was an important time for my family. I made the decision to breastfeed. So on the days I was in the office, that meant that I would need to pump. Guess what? Pumping takes time. At a minimum, 30 minutes per session. And I needed to have at least 2 sessions a day during work hours. So I prepared for it. I blocked out my schedule for the times I needed to pump during the day. I had all the supplies with me at all times, with spares of everything in my office. My office had glass walls everywhere, so I couldn't pump there. Instead, I went to the lactation room, which was a short walk down the hall. A lactation space is a room in an office building, mall, or airport that gives people who are breastfeeding a clean space to pump and that has locked doors for privacy. In the lactation room at work, a key was issued from security to enter the room, which we each got to keep for the duration of the time we needed access to the room. When you entered, there were 2 smaller interior rooms. It was first come, first serve. If the smaller interior rooms were occupied, you had to wait until your fellow working parent left before you could go in and pump. When I first came back to work, my schedule wasn't very busy. I had flexibility and only a few meetings a day. If the rooms in the lactation space were occupied, I could wait. After a few weeks of getting into my new role, though, my calendar began to fill up. I still had time blocked for my pumping sessions during the day, but if I went in and a room wasn't available, I had to wait or find an alternative place to pump. I've pumped in bathrooms, gross, my car multiple times, or office rooms that I could barricade or block so no one could come in. Only once did someone actually get through my makeshift barricade at an offsite meeting when I was pumping. I affixed a sign on a scrap piece of paper scrawling "Occupied" in green highlighter and put it on the exterior side of the door and had put a heavy chair on the other side of the door. If someone missed the sign, they would be stopped by the chair in front of the door. Just in case, I had a cover on while pumping. Even with all of those deterrents, it was pretty awkward to meet a new team member when she went looking for someone and came into the room, totally missing my sign, undeterred by the chair barricade. Once in a while, I made the decision not to pump. If you miss a pump, you are messing with your milk production and you may produce less, which isn't great because it's a supply and demand thing. If you skip a pump,
then you are telling your body that you don't need to produce that milk for your baby, and you then may produce less over time. I wasn't producing as much milk as I wanted anyway, so missing a pumping session was not ideal, and the guilt piled on. Over time, my job got more demanding, and I made trade-offs. I didn't pump for as long as I should have. I took calls while I was pumping, and sometimes I took meetings instead of pumping. Then I took more meetings. My twice-daily pumping would be compromised to 1 pump a day, and then that pump would happen later and later each day. And then sometimes I would get home and the baby would have already eaten, and I had to pump then instead of feeding him. I didn't keep my schedule blocked and held for pumping. I made small decisions to be available for a meeting instead of pumping, and eventually it led me to stop pumping and feeding him breast milk because I hadn't held onto my boundaries. The boundary of keeping my time blocked for pumping had a longer-term consequence. I fed him breast milk for 10.5 months, and I'm proud of that. Did he get supplemented with formula? Yep. Does it matter? Nope. It's easy to see how a boundary can get overridden because of the demands or priorities of something else. In hindsight, instead of giving myself permission to miss my pumping sessions, I could have given myself permission to decline a meeting invitation that was clearly labeled busy on my calendar. By accepting meeting invitations, I was saying yes to someone else and no to myself. I could have said yes to myself more to keep my boundary. I didn't want to seem unavailable to others. I didn't want to seem uncommitted. But those are the exact things that I was being to myself, uncommitted and unavailable. In that moment, though, giving myself grace and compassion for doing what I could do at the time was the most important gift I could give myself. What I know is that to be relentless with boundaries, you have to keep space for them. Living your boundaries looks like telling people about your boundaries, telling them again, modeling the behavior for your team, empowering others to live their boundaries, saying no and offering an alternative solution, feeling uncomfortable but doing it anyway, having hard discussions, delegating, being relentlessly consistent, giving yourself permission to be committed and available to your own interests above others' interests. By modeling it, you can set the expectation and give others permission to put boundaries around their work too. Sometimes others need to see something happening before they believe that they can do it. Then they are empowered to do it for themselves. When you are in a leadership position, I think it's even more important to role model. Keeping your boundaries looks like saying no a lot, or saying no and setting a realistic expectation of what can happen. It looks like saying no to meeting requests, declining them, or giving alternate times that you can meet. It means telling people what you are doing and then doing it consistently. My client Megan had to learn to say no to others to say yes to herself. Megan was a tenured executive in the hospitality industry. She was in back-to-back meetings every day and was overwhelmed. Upon reflection of her values, she realized that her value of achievement and knowledge, being seen as an expert and contributor at work, was leaving her exhausted. She was giving so much of her energy to her job, and when she did have family time and downtime, she was too exhausted to enjoy it. Her values of achievement and knowledge were impeding on successfully living her value of family. What did successfully living her value of family mean? She wanted to spend focused time with her child. She knew she needed a leave from work to accomplish this. The company she worked for reflected values of showing care to employees first. This was very personal. Would her manager understand? Would her company support this leave? She worried about the objections she may receive. Would she still be seen as the expert if she wasn't available? Megan built a system to prepare her team for her absence, including a plan to reprioritize meetings and delegate to her team. Then, she had the discussion with her manager about her needs. Guess what happened? Her manager was very supportive. Megan was able to spend that focused time with her family. What if she hadn't shared this information with her company? She'd be unavailable for her family and potentially unhappier, unable to get that need met. When delivering the message to her team that she would be taking a leave, she got unexpected reactions. They thanked her. They thanked her for showing up as an example of the company's values of caring for employees. They had never seen it in action with such a senior leader. It motivated them to think about their needs too. What could be possible for them? Living your boundaries means being okay with the uncomfortable feeling that you get when you keep your boundary. You may feel uncomfortable asserting your boundaries. You may feel like you're letting someone down. For years, your go-to behavior has been to show up for others first. The discomfort that you are feeling is discomfort from building a new behavior. This new behavior conflicts with the years of people-pleasing behaviors, of being available for everyone else. Know that this momentary discomfort in upholding your boundaries will bring you the peace that you need in time. Your long-term peace is greater than the short-term discomfort. Keeping your boundaries looks like prioritizing something and deprioritizing something else. Saying no to a good idea. There are projects that you get so excited about, you don't care if you work more on them because it's fun and energizing work, but it is still more work. I've had to say no to some of this work. Because time is a limited commodity, what would we have to give up to work on this new shiny project? It is in the everyday that you live your values and boundaries, the everyday decisions. Do I attend a client meeting? Or do I delegate it so I can work on a prioritized project? Do I go to a networking meeting? Or do I keep my workout plans? By holding to your boundaries, you are creating an environment of living your values to prioritize what is important to you. It doesn't always feel good, but you have to be consistent. If you don't stick to your boundaries, then no one else will.
I want to thank you so much for listening to the You Belong in the C-Suite podcast. If you are enjoying this content, please remember to rate and review on Apple Podcasts. By leaving a review, you are helping others find this content. We will be featuring 5-star reviews on air in upcoming episodes. Editing and support for the podcast is done by S&E Podcast Management. To get more tips and tools to help you live a life guided by your values, go to thecatchgroup.com. Keep your boundaries and take care.